Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Always delighted to have Chase and Alex lead the switch. We're going through Outwitting the Devil, and today we are going to be talking about replacing fear. This is a huge theme, and looking forward to diving into it. Take it away, Alex and Chase.
All right. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one too. So welcome everyone, or welcome back to many of you to the switch. For anybody joining us for the first time, if you're not familiar with Outwitting the Devil, don't worry. This is week 8 of our series, but quick recap, I'll catch you up and then you'll know everything you need to know. Outwitting the Devil was written by Napoleon Hill, written in 1938, but was not published until 2011. Now, Napoleon Hill is famous for Think and Grow Rich, which is, about success principles, but he also studied failure, probably 10 times more than he studied success. And Outwitting the Devil is a transcript of his conversation with the devil. Now, it's debated whether he imagined this conversation or whether it was a real conversation or whether he used it as a metaphor. Doesn't matter. In this conversation, the devil is very honest about all the ways he induces people to drifting away from their desires, goals, dreams, things that they want out of life. And in the conversation, it also elucidates the principles that act as a bulwark against drifting, essentially finding what he calls your other self. Each week in this series, we've been going through those principles. And this week, week 8, we have a new principle about fear. And the way this discussion goes is we'll actually recap a little bit of last week, because every week we give an exercise that we present to embody some aspect of that principle. So we'll start with a quick recap and feedback on last week's exercise for anyone who did it. And then we'll introduce the idea this week about fear. We'll talk about what fear is, what kinds of things people fear, how we respond to fear, and how we might change our response. After that, we'll go through the exercise, go into breakout rooms for small group discussions, and then come back for takeaways. So, buckle up. Here we go. First off, the principle from last week was about using your time wisely, budgeting your time so that none of it is wasted. And the exercise, I had everyone take a slice of their week, ideally a day, and break it into chunks. We gave an analogy of a garden. And to really take each chunk and look at what you're doing and analyze, is this moving you toward your goals, or is this an example of you wasting time, drifting, essentially? So we'll start with Alex, and if anyone completed that exercise and would like to talk about it, just let me know in the chat, and you can pop in and talk for 2 minutes when Alex is done. Alex, what'd you get?
So like I mentioned last week, this is something I've been doing for years, just tracking in my GCal everything I do pretty much 30 minutes and in increments of 30 minutes. So I did the same thing this week, but I tried to be a little bit more reflective on what I was going through and changing and what worked and what didn't. So I figured out that when I schedule things in for myself and I track, have a schedule, I'm looking at my time, I'm able to use my time very efficiently. And I'm pretty accurate with how long it takes me to do stuff. And just to catch everybody up, the reason I'm able to do the scheduling is because I've tracked what I spend my time doing, and I've been able to go back and really kind of optimize the flow of my day. But I realized where I get off track in my work stuff is during interpersonal interactions. So I might have scheduled, talk to this person for 30 minutes. And what I've noticed is that every single time it goes significantly over. And those are the things I wasn't realizing, was that I wasn't budgeting enough time for interpersonal interactions, because they are valuable to me. And I want to cultivate my relationships in work and outside of work. So I realized I need to be more allow for more space for that, and not just schedule 30 minutes and then at the end of the day think like, oh, why didn't I get all my work done? It's because I budgeted too much, because I wasn't giving interpersonal interactions their value of time. Oh, also one more thing. I tried using Shrikant's 5-minute idea to get work done. So while I was working on my projects, my music projects, I set a 5-minute timer and just made a huge list of all the stuff I wanted to get done and went through and just tried doing that. For my specific workflow, I realized that it really needed to be about 10 minutes because I was consistently not getting them done in 5. I think it's just slightly too big of per task. It was kind of the under 30-second tasks and the over 10-minute tasks, 10 to 15 minutes. But when I go to a different workflow, I think the 5 minutes is going to be perfect. So I definitely encourage people to try that out. And I'm linking it in the videos because I was streaming my working. So it's a web.
Cool. So I did this exercise as well, not to the granularity that I would have liked, but I was having trouble because I was trying to pick between a typical weekday where, as I've mentioned previously, I'm actually now moving into my last week in this job where I would say, as far as the things that I want out of life, it is slow movement at best, versus the weekend where like I don't take a break on the weekend at this point. I use the weekend days to work on the things that I find meaningful. I use that to prep for the Switch. I use that to do all my audio production, my music, all that stuff. So I took a Saturday and really I have one big takeaway for that and then one takeaway for the 5-minute timers. So my big takeaway from tracking my time is that I was actually able to focus for a lot longer than I thought. My impression of how long I could focus on something was maybe 3 or 4 hours of intense focus. And I ended up doing almost 7 hours of intense focus on one specific project. And, granted, it was not unbroken focus. I did snack in between. I did get up and walk around, but I didn't have to shift to a different project. So that was actually interesting to see. But for the 5-minute timer thing, in my work as a mix engineer, I do a lot of things in the audio world, but particularly when I'm wearing my mix engineer hat, the 5-minute timer idea is very, very helpful because the way that your ears work psychoacoustically, if you focus for more than 5 minutes on one thing, you stop hearing it the same way. So, I'm going to get a little technical for a second. If I go into, let's say I'm mixing a rock session and I've got, drums on all summed to one channel and guitar to one channel, and I hear something wrong with the guitar. This is one of my very common steps. I'll go into the guitar, pull up an equalizer and start trying to carve out the problem frequencies. And you have to be like very, very attentive listening wise. Like it takes training to train your ears to listen in the right way to be able to hear those things. And there were days in the past where I would spend 20 minutes trying to find something and get frustrated and be like, I thought I had it, I thought I nailed it, and now it's sounding funny and I just can't find it anymore. Like my attention is so diffuse, I don't even know what to do. But in limiting to the 5-minute cycles in the way that Shrikant said, I've been able to make sure my ears stay dialed in, because when you switch your attention to something else, that psychoacoustic response can reset if the sound is different enough. And if you're just so saturated that you've done all these different things and you're psychoacoustically burnt out, you can just take the headphones off for 5 minutes and reset your ears, or walk out of the room for 5 minutes if you're mixing on monitors. So that 5-minute thing works in many, many ways, not just in productivity, but in making sure that your focus is as sharp as possible on the things that you're working on. So, all right, that's my feedback on the exercise. Looks like Joe's up next. And then again, if anybody else wants to give their feedback on the time tracking or 5-minute timer thing, you're welcome to. please keep it short, and then we're going to move on to the next exercise. So Joe, you're up.
Yeah, I had a difficult time with this only because I'm in a unique situation. I'm in a different setting. So it's altogether like I'm not in my usual place where I work. So that made it a little bit more difficult. What I did find out a little bit that I was wasting some time in actually thinking about the task. So when I did I could use the 5-minute timer with tasks that I was really passionate about, and it made it really work well for me. It really helped. In fact, I would actually go sometimes above the 5 minutes, but the 5 minutes would get a lot of good ideas on there, and then I would just keep going, and I would complete my tasks. Whereas, some of the tasks that I wasn't weren't looking forward to, I did struggle with those, and I realized in that process is that I wasted a lot of time and energy. That if I just had taken action, that I would have been a lot better off. So what it really kind of showed me more than anything is that I get stuck in my own head. So that's a real problem that I need to work through. Specifically when I'm thinking about things like philosophy or things that are a little bit more challenging to think about, that I'll have a tendency to get caught in my own head. So if I'm reading a philosophical text, I'll immediately let my mind wander, and then also I won't be as productive, and I won't feel as good at the end of it. And so that was something that was pretty clear during the week, that I guess I can correct it, but it's not going to be an easy correction, even if I am aware of it. So
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
nice.
Stephen.
Hi. So my understanding of the exercise was to keep track of what you do from the moment you get up and the moment you go to bed, or whatever time frame you want to do. I didn't do the 5-minute thing, but I only did this one day.
Yep.
And found it very effective, and wanted to do it again. I
Nice.
also wanted to try and create the special to-do list, because I'm a big fan of to-do lists, and I already have one, but that might have been helpful. So some of the lessons that I got from doing it was that I worked too hard.
Oh, interesting.
And I often find myself thinking or doing multiple tasks, at least 2 tasks simultaneously, which could be a pro and a con. And a lot of what I do is mindless, so it doesn't require a lot of attention. 2, not enough hours in the day to do everything I want, especially personal, because I'm either mentally or physically exhausted after the end of the day. I try to, because I've worked from home for quite a few years, and I've always struggled with how I can devote some more me time. So I do that by like a certain point at night, like 7 o'clock, no more work, and the rest of the evening is personal. And perhaps I could be more productive if I didn't watch that TV show or whatever it happens to be, or spending time on social media, which I'm pretty good with that because I don't particularly like it, and have to do some of that for my job as well. But it helped me think of things in a different way, and just keeping track of what I do and what I want to do takes time. So it's sort of a catch-22 there. So
Yeah.
that's what I got out of it.
Just a quick follow-up question.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you deliberately set aside, after a certain point at night, this is me time, this is relaxation time. And you think perhaps you could be more productive if you swapped out that time for work time. But the one place where that sets up a red flag for me is, if you're somebody who can experience creative burnout, productivity burnout, it's also possible that that time is what's keeping you able to be productive for the rest of that time during the day, if that makes sense. Like that's it's potentially recharge time. Does that seem like it's serving that function for you, or did it actually seem useless? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I'm not sure what you're saying are you saying by ending work and devoting the evenings to myself, that could help me be more productive during the day?
Yeah, I'm asking you, I guess.
Okay, so I understand, right? That I think I'm pretty productive during the day already. I would like to be more productive with my reading, for example, personally, but like I said, I'm too exhausted.
I see.
So maybe what I have to do is I devote maybe some time during the day on the weekends to do
Gotcha.
stuff like that. But I see what you're saying.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Stephen. All right. And with that, we will move on to today's topic. So the quote for today, the principle for today is: recognize the truth that fear is generally a filler with which the devil occupies the unused portion of your mind. It is only a state of mind which you can control by filling the space it occupies with faith in your ability to make life provide you with whatever you demand of it. So the first question that arises for me with fear is, what is fear? Just so that we can all be on the same page and know what we're talking about. And in case anyone hasn't seen it, I did post today's discussion questions in the chat so that you can sort of read ahead on where we're going with this. But first, I want to talk about, what is fear? If anyone has any ideas, feel free to post it in the chat, or maybe one or two people can chime in. But in that particular quote, there are two things that stick out. Number one, it's a filler with which the devil occupies the unused portion of your mind. And number two is, it's a state of mind which you can control. And it goes on to state the means for controlling it. The way I understand fear, at a fundamental level, it's your mind's indicator that something may kill you or physically harm you. It's a deep-rooted psychological response. And in an evolutionary sense, you can think of our evolutionary context as, social creatures that for a very long time lived in small groups, where if you were to make a social misstep, it actually could mean death. Not necessarily, in some cases, but not necessarily from backlash, which is possible, but also from ostracization. Being cast out from the group means death for your genes. So the evolutionary roots of things like social fear make sense in that context. But I want to hear, what is fear? I did already get one response in the chat that I'll read real quick so that people can think about it. And then Alex, I want to get your response. So it was messaged to me privately, so I'll keep the name anonymous. It's three things: not getting what you want, losing something, or being found out. Interesting. Alex, what do you think?
So I want to break fear from my perspective, how I experience it, down into two kind of categories. So the first is the conscious feeling part of it. So this is something I think I experience relatively high relative to a significant portion of the population. It's the adrenaline feeling, the extreme anxiety, and just the heart racing, the physical feelings of fear, the thing that when you have something coming up in 10 minutes that you don't feel ready for, that you're just that physical suffering is making you dread. I get that pretty significantly. But when I was thinking about this question, I identified a different part of fear that's subconscious, and it's actually very different for me. So I would describe it as subconscious aversions to doing things. So these are not things I'm consciously deciding not to do. It's more, let's say I have a fear of not being good enough at some certain task. My mind will rationalize, oh, you shouldn't do that just because this or that. And I don't experience any of that physical anxiety about it, but subconsciously my mind shut off the possibility of it because there's a fear that it's not going to go how I would want it to. And I would say that how that usually manifests itself would be in dismissiveness towards experiences. I'd say that's how I want to kind of think about it along those two lines as I go through my stuff. The biggest thing that I think triggers both of those for me is the unknown. It's not knowing what to expect. And maybe that's because I'm a very structured person. I like to plan ahead. I like to be prepared. If I know I have something coming up, I'm going to show up on time and prepared for it. But if I don't know when I have to show up and I don't know what I have to know, that's going to kind of make my intuitive sensors go haywire. And I'm just going to be, as this quote kind of says, experiencing the space between now and that thing that I don't know what to do with. Mm. Whereas if it's a familiar event, example, I have a test coming up. It's on these subjects. I don't get nervous about that because although there is the variable of I don't know what the questions will be, I know the general topics. I know what I have to do. There's the more variables there are, the worse the fear is. You want me to keep going?
Yeah, if you want. Again, if you just want to keep going on what is fear, we will get to what are people afraid of. If you want to, it's up to you.
Yeah. So I guess my main point is, as variables increase and time decreases between me and the event, fear increases, right? So it's this, the space feels more intense the closer it is. And personally, I've noticed I have kind of an equal and opposite reaction. When I get past a very scary event, I have a high on the other end, right? It's like a total relaxation and just a enjoyment of, I got past that. So I'll wait for my other stuff till we get into more specifics.
So I have two questions for you, actually. First, do you have any insight into what's going on in your mind when something, specifically something that's a big unknown is causing you this fear response? Like, besides the physical sensation, what do your thoughts look like? And then the second question is, were you afraid to walk 50 miles? And did you feel that relief afterward?
I was severely under afraid to walk, which caused me to not prepare. So I would say that was a failure of my fear systems. But it was because it didn't seem like there was any unknown to me.
Yeah.
Just walking, right? Going forward, I know how to put one foot in front of the other. There's no unknowns. And I've noticed that the suffering is not really what causes the fear for me. I don't really care if I'm going to be in pain. That doesn't really scare me. I'm sure some type of pain would for sure scare me, right? But I don't think my mind is calibrated to an appropriate fear reaction to pain or suffering, that type. It's more in, as we'll get more into, it's more in regards to social things. Like if we're talking about social interactions, the variability of humans in general is so high that automatically any interaction with a person is going to supersede the variables of any other type of interaction by myself.
Yeah. Stephen in the chat said you're right on. Fear is always caused by something or some outcome being unknown. Yeah, I think you've gotten to the heart of it, that unknowns are often what cause fear. I have to think about it more to see if that's the overarching commonality between all fear, but that's an interesting idea. Also, another message that I got: people come from either love or fear, which is an appeal for love. Interesting. If you want to explain that, put an exclamation point in the chat and I'll ask you some questions, or just hear what you have to say about that. See, also, Ronica says, is there a difference between fear and cowardice? Yes. First of all, fear is a feeling. Cowardice is action. Cowardice is succumbing to fear. That's how I would put it. All right, Joe.
I mean, I think you guys captured fear pretty well. There's just one aspect of it that that I personally struggle with, is the idea of not contributing in one way, shape, or form. So it's the fear of letting another person down. So that is probably my greatest fear, and it has a way of I guess that leads to a certain level of rejection, but it really isn't that, as much as that if you let another person down, then you know, are they becoming the best person that they can be, kind of thing. So that's how relationships need to be reciprocated. Like and I guess holding up your end of the bargain is really important. So that's a fear that I personally, that's how I define fear, because the fear of letting someone else down is actually meaningful, whereas the fear of what another person thinks of you is a little bit different. You know, that's you know, that's something you can deal with pretty easily, because you really can't control that. And you really can't control if you let somebody else down and something out of your control, you know, caused it. Like, you know, something happens, but anyway, that's how I define fear, within the sense of not holding up your end of the bargain.
Interesting. Yeah. And that kind of gets into our next question, is what kinds of things are people afraid of? I see some other hands coming up in the chat. Julie.
I finally found Course in Miracles, which really just simplifies everything for me as far as getting it right. It really resonates for me, which says people are either coming from love or fear, which is an appeal for love. But most fears are based on lies. Whether if it's fear of abandonment, I'm afraid that I won't be okay. If it's fear of rejection, it's a fear that I'm not okay. Fear that I'll screw up, it means I don't trust myself. Fear that I'll mess up. I mean, they're all, if you walk through fear and challenge it, usually you find out that you could have done it the whole time. And faith and love, you can't be fearful when you're coming totally from love, or gratitude, actually. And fear is based on some kind of, everyone's been told a lie that he's not okay, so he goes looking the world outside to fix him, and it never happens. The work needs to be done inside, and it's based on lack. But when you're coming from love, you're either extending love or we're projecting fear. And we have a choice at every given moment whether we see the innocence in our brother or we see his guilt. And we taking our power back. We are way more powerful than we know. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Ad Z, you've got some great discussion going in the chat. You want to chime in on your comment? First of all, Ad said, why don't zebras have ulcers? Interesting question. And that brings up the relationship between fear and stress, which I think is very interesting. But okay, Ad doesn't want to talk. Gang.
Yeah, I think fear is kind of you don't have control of things, and you have no prediction of the result, and you don't know if you can handle it. That's why we have fear. I think the courage is, even though we don't know what we get into, but we think we can overcome it, whatever happens. Like that's confidence and courage. So fear is like you're afraid, like order and chaos, like you're entering chaos when you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't really believe you can overcome the chaos. I think that's the difference. If we build this confidence in ourselves, then we have less fear, because we know whatever chaos come into, we can take care of it. Even though we don't know what's coming in and we don't know what we're going to do, but we know we will figure out. I think that belief is the key to overcome fear, the belief in yourself, in your ability.
Yeah, absolutely. So you make two interesting points there. I'll start with the belief one. I agree. I think that that's absolutely the key to bravery, is having some belief that you can survive it, or that you can overcome whatever the thing is. And that's what this quote gets at as well. Again, to repeat the second half of the quote, it's only a state of mind which you can control by filling the space it occupies with faith in your ability to make life provide you with whatever you demand of it. Which, included in that, I think, is the ability to survive situations where there's a perceived potential threat, or there's a perception that you might not make it through something. Absolutely. The other thing that you said had to do with chaos, and I think chaos and control. So that brings to mind two different things. First of all, the Stoic perception of, or the Stoic idea of the dichotomy of control. There are things that you can control, and then things that you cannot control. And part of the Stoic practice is this almost radical acceptance of the things that you cannot control. Things that are outside of your control are essentially, in the Stoic view, not worth worrying about, because they're not under your control. What is worrying going to do? That doesn't change them. All that does is harm you. And for the things that you can control, well, do your best with those. Why worry about those? They're under your control, so do them right, do them the best. So, that's obviously an oversimplification of the human experience, the way that I just paraphrased it. Obviously, the Stoics have their heads screwed on straight. They know what's up. And the Stoic thought on fear and how to overcome it is much more complex than what I just said. But that's sort of the basic logic of it, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Lastly, it also reminds me of, in Jordan Peterson's book Maps of Meaning, there's this section at the end called the Divinity of Interest, and I can't remember the exact phrasing that he uses to talk about this, but I remember when I read that, getting the takeaway that, and this may not even be what he was meaning for the takeaway, but for me, getting the takeaway that when you feel negative emotion towards something, it's an indicator to pay attention, at the very least to pay attention. And most people's response to any negative emotion is the habitual turn and move the other way. But when you are mindful of what negative emotion actually means, you'll see that most of the time it means, actually, no, face this thing and look at it so you can decide what to do. Because it's possible it's a threat, it's possible it's an opportunity, but when it's in your periphery, you don't know. And so that's that alarm going off in your brain to like face this thing. So, that goes into our next question, which is,
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up before you go on to
yeah, sure.
Just with regards to the dichotomy of control, are interactions with other people in one or the other category? For example, you have the choice whether to interact with somebody or not, right? Pretty much. But but I feel like their impressions of you and your place in society is kind of a middle ground where it seems kind of up in the air. Like you can do your part, but you can't rely on the outcome or on the, you know, how the interactions proceed. And I think it's made more complicated by the fact that other people may not always give you a honest reaction with which to clarify how you're approaching the situation, right? They may behave dishonestly or talk about you behind your back or act a different way, which I feel like deprives you of the learning that you could have from a negative social interaction. I'm just curious, what do the Stoics say about that, or what would you say?
Yeah. So what I would say is, if you are looking at a situation and it seems to you partially in your control and partially not, break it into parts. There are parts of social interactions that are under your control, namely how you conduct yourself, the attention that you pay to how you conduct yourself, really the mindfulness that you take into the situation. And there are parts you can't control, other people's impressions of you, other people's words about you, other people's words to you, your status, essentially. And the Stoics talk about that, and they talk about it in granular detail and how to treat those kinds of situations and how to bring that mindset to those situations where it may seem complex, because it is complex. And really the solution is break it down.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so that gets into the question, how do we normally respond to fear? I mentioned in the divinity of interest idea that when you feel negative emotion, often we have avoidance and denial, and that's a fairly normal, unfortunately, habit for people in the face of fear and negative emotion. There's also the physiological response that you mentioned, Alex. What are some of the patterns that we have in how we respond to fear? And we'll combine that with the last question, which is, how might we change our response? How do we, to use the quote, fill the space it occupies with faith in our ability to make life provide us with what we demand of it?
So my input with how we deal with it is more of an observation on kind of the habits of it. So it seems to me fear is very based, in my reaction to it, is very based on the trends. If I'm consistently in stressful situations, not overly stressful where I'm getting super worn down and overwhelmed, but just mildly stressful things, it's much easier for me to confront something that's scary. It's kind of what I'm doing. It's building up the confidence. And I have a couple examples. And the less I do anything difficult or scary, the harder it is, and the lower the threshold of things need to be to elicit that fear response. So, for example, back in high school during summer vacation, when I had nothing to do, if there was anything I had to do, if it was go to the doctor's just for a checkup, if it was go to a guitar lesson, just very not stressful situations, in theory, because there was nothing else other than playing video games and doing whatever I wanted, that seemed very stressful. Whereas during the school year, those same doctor's appointments or guitar lessons were just like nothing. If anything, a nice respite from the school day, right? So it seems very relative to me. And the biggest example for me is driving, right? Like I have a fear of driving, but for a period of time I was driving every day and that was more or less gone. But the less I drive, the more that like thought in my head, oh, you don't want to have to drive again. And that the longer it goes, the harder it gets, they're just so on and so forth. So I'd say it's contextual.
Yeah, interesting. In the chat, Ad mentioned a fear of flying. That's interesting because that's almost a combination of the physiological sensation of like it's an unnatural position to be in, like that high up. But of course, that's only the precursor to the thoughts, and the thoughts may be something like this plane could crash and I would die, which is interesting. So, Julie, do you want to say what you just said in the chat out loud?
Okay. Well, I've been letting curiosity replace my fear and a sense of adventure, including my own feeling of fear. Get curious about it instead of hiding and resisting it. Also, just picturing the worst case scenario and quit resisting that, and just say, you know what, I let it go. If it's out of my control, I let it go. And at the moment I do that, it helps.
It's very stoic, especially the second part.
Yeah, that's one of my techniques too. Like create a sense of adventure, like pretend I'm in like a movie where I'm, trying to investigate things or find out, and it's just like a journey, when it kind of really kind of demystifies it.
So I kind of want to use this moment to talk about a specific experience that I had with a pretty consistent fear, anxiety response, and how I retrained myself. Just for context, I want to ask a question at the end about the difference between sort of a system 1 approach to fear and a system 2 approach to fear. So to refamiliarize everyone before I tell this story, for anyone who hasn't read Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, I definitely recommend it. But he bifurcates conscious and unconscious thought into sort of 2 systems. System 1 is the automatic, effortless thinking that includes things like quote unquote muscle memory, habits, processing speech, for adults generating speech. When you hear 2 + 2 and your mind just says 4, like that's system 1. System 2 is the deliberate, effortful thinking, and that would be things like if you were to try to solve 67 times 243, you would have to like effortfully, most of us may have to write that out. That would be effortful thinking. When you're trying to learn a new task or skill, that's effortful thinking. So that's system 2, automatic is system 1. Okay, so my quick story. In college, I got to a point where I had pretty bad social anxiety, and like very specific. That means something very specific. Usually, social anxiety is associated with anxiety and specific thought patterns that have to do with social interactions and situations. So for anybody who's not familiar, you can go look up more details on social anxiety specifically, but it's a specific kind of anxiety that has to do with social situations. And for me, it got to a point where I needed to do something because I was unable to go and make friends. I was having trouble approaching people to talk about things that were important to me. And just in general, it was really doing some harm to my ability to get what I wanted out of life. And so I approached treatment for social anxiety. And it was this interesting, like non-clinical online program, but they use a technique called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually a big umbrella term for a couple of different kinds of cognitive behavioral therapy. But I want to describe the process because I think this is it's amazing. So first of all, the first step was to almost do some like classroom time elucidating the thought patterns of social anxiety. And they use this term cognitive distortions. And cognitive distortions are specific patterns of things like mind reading. I'm trying to remember the other ones. Disastrous thinking, catastrophizing, that's what it's called. And there's like a big list of cognitive distortions associated with social anxiety. And it's basically where you get thoughts that you tell yourself things are going to go bad. That person hates me. I shouldn't talk to that person. It's going to go poorly. whatever is happening. And those are sort of second order effects of social anxiety. But so that's the first portion of CBT in this case. The second step is establishing a system for measuring felt anxiety and being able to track it, being able to, go forward having some way to talk about specific feelings of anxiety for expected situations, and to use that metric to then further jump off to that point of identifying the cognitive distortions involved in specific incidences of anxiety. And then it's the therapy approach where you systematically expose yourself to situations of higher expected anxiety. And it went like this. We did exposures where you would think of a situation that would rate maybe like a 2 out of 10 on the anxiety scale. And you would write out exactly what the situation is and the steps that you would take to do it. And then you'd write out your expected level of anxiety. And like I said, in this case, your very first few would be in low level, like 2 or 3. And then you would plan a specific time to go and actually go out and do it. And then you would go and do it. I still remember my first one. There was this coffee shop where I would get coffee every single day, or tea at the time. And it was the same barista there every single day. She knew my order. I had never said a word to her other than my order. I hadn't even said hi because that was too much anxiety for me. My very first exposure was to just say, "Hey, how's your day going?" to the barista. And I wrote it out. I made a plan. I made everything, it was great. And then I went and did it, and then immediately went back up to the apartment and wrote out the debrief section, which was, how much anxiety did you actually feel? How much do you feel now that you've done it? Which cognitive distortions happened in lead up in the process of anxiety, identifying the specific thought patterns that happened, and then creating counterexamples for those cognitive distortions. So for example, if I was thinking, she's going to think it's really awkward for me to ask how her day is going because I see her all the time and I never say anything. And then I go and do it and she says, "Oh, it's fine. How's yours going?" "Oh, good, thanks." And then I leave, and that's the whole interaction. The counterexample might be, she didn't think that was awkward at all. She reciprocated. That's normal social interaction. So right there, you are retraining your mind to essentially not follow the path of those cognitive distortions. And you just do that over and over and ramp it up. And my understanding of CBT is that this is the approach that CBT takes to all kinds of anxiety, right? Whether it's related to specific situations or general or whatever. So you are training the mind to, in an evolutionary sense, believe that it can survive situations, that by going into a situation that's causing you that social anxious response, you're not going to be ostracized from the tribe and, whatever. And for me, this approach worked amazingly. And now I feel like I've integrated this approach over the last however many years it's been since I started doing that into all of my situations of fear and anxiety. So then the question is this a system 1 or system 2 approach to fear? Or maybe it's both, but I wanted to relate it to system 1 and system 2. That's all.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to obviously I know the CBT stuff, but interesting with system 1. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like at the beginning how I said there's that kind of the subconscious aversions that are built up over time, that may play into the things you're not thinking about, right? That would be the system 1 or type stuff, and it almost opens as you learn through experience that they're not as scary as you think. It's like you're able to slowly move them over to system 2 to then deal with them and work through them, and then slowly moving them over to work through them and let them go.
Back into system 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of corrected. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Stephen in the chat said, like most fears, I think, while real, especially physically, social anxiety is irrational. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the point, is that, your rational faculties are all system 2 processes, and to take an experience like a physiological experience of anxiety that's a system 1 process, like you said, move it over to system 2, use your rational faculties to rearrange it, and then do that enough that you can shift that process back into system 1. That's CBT as far as I understand.
Chase, did you experience those thoughts of like catastrophization and all the other negative things? Were those conscious? Like when you went in and were about to have a social interaction, were you just feeling that, or was your mind also thinking, oh no, she's gonna think this and that? Like maybe this just has to do with how we express our thoughts, but I've noticed that's a big difference with me, is I don't think in words or ideas in fear situations, really. It's that heightened physical response for me.
Yeah, I think primarily as a physical response, and I don't know that I primarily think in words either, but I think in this case, when you're having like cyclical thoughts, for me that does manifest as words. And so in some situations, yeah, I was literally saying those words to myself, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so awkward. Like I shouldn't do this. This is too awkward. Like I don't want to be seen as an awkward person. And then, she's going to know somebody that I know, and they're going to hear about it. I'm going to be so embarrassed. Like it would run through situations like that are just completely irrational. Right. And like, it's kind of funny to think about, at least the low level ones. It's kind of funny to think about, but yeah, that's how it was for me.
Cool.
Julie, and then Gang.
You're just you have a default that's a habitual fear-based reaction that happens to you, and so you're taking charge and you're being conscious of it, and you're choosing a different behavior, and hopefully that will become, well, it looks like it already is your new default.
Yeah, definitely. Gang.
Yeah, I actually want to share with you guys a very scary thing encountered yesterday. So I brought my family to snowshoeing because we are not skiing this year. And on the way back, I was driving my older son. He's driving with his dad because he's just trying to get his license. I drive with my younger kids. And when I was driving on the freeway on the way back, suddenly something bumped into me on the back. I was auto control. It was like, it's such a surreal feeling. It's like suddenly I said, what's happening? Then I realized. So anyway, so I think I was reading the stillness is the key, and also join the Stoic training. So luckily, and we walk in this snow, Gold Creek Pond is very serene. Anyway, luckily I was able to be calm. I thought I'm going to die because it's really high speed and it was like bumped, and I either run into the side, bump into something. It was like, I don't know what's going to happen. But anyway, in the end, I get back to control and park on the side. And the guy who hit me went to a ditch. So in the end, the police come over, and I said, what is this guy having drug or drunk or whatever? Anyways, they said he's sleeping. He's full asleep on the. But what I learned actually, it helped me to understand, because I heard a lot of people have what do you call the stress of driving. They're not driving on freeway, and I didn't understand it before. Now I understand, because we can only control our part. We can't control what the other drivers are doing. So I think, like Stoicism said, the best thing we can do is do our part as best as we can. But there's no way we can control what other drivers are doing. One way is we are never going to a freeway. That's the only way we can control, which we give up our freedom. So I was scared, but then I decided, I will not let this. So I actually end up picking my husband later with a tow truck, something. And so I just realized, it helped me to understand other people better, but also I realized we have to give face sometime, to other people, even though there's a few people, they don't follow the rules. They will create damage situation. but those are rare, like flying. You know, if you think all the details, all the possibilities, nobody wants to fly because you have no control when you're in the sky. But sometimes we have to give a little bit faith in other people, at the same time, not give up our freedom because of fear. You know, it's leap of faith in some sense.
Yeah, to kind of tie in what you just said with what Joe said from earlier, I feel like there's a big part of me that has a hard time accepting that faith in other people to do their part. And I think that's why, like Joe said in the beginning, I have such a fear of letting others down and being that type of person who does not do their part to allow others the opportunity to trust other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's one
Yeah.
other.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very important. So it actually helped me because sometimes I drive high speed. You know, I got a ticket one time when I drive to Glacier Park. So they asked me to do this study, and I learned a lot of things through that study because I learned driving at 26 when I come to graduate school. So I never go to driving lessons. I just learned through driving. But anyway, I learned a lot of things through that. Actually, through these accidents, make me more aware, you know, how important it is to drive safe, not just for ourselves, but also for other people. If everybody doing that, you know, it will be much better.
Yeah. So I thought of another situation of fear that I was thinking about recently in the last couple of months that I think is at least worth putting out there to analyze. So it's the fear of success in the sense that, okay, I'll just describe the situation. I know someone who is relatively advanced in age, not a young or middle-aged person. I hesitate to say old, who is resistant to the idea that they can affect positive change in their life through means that are normally long-term, things like diet and exercise, right? You know, when you think of diet and exercise, if you're severely overweight, you might be on a 10-year plan for you know, getting all of your biomarkers in check, your weight, your vitamins, your A1C or whatever. When you think of exercise, you know, you might be on a 5-year plan for increasing your ability to run a certain distance or lift a certain weight. But, you know, I think that for certain people, there's this mindset of, I'm too old to start that because I think I will never reach that end goal. And I don't actually think I don't think that's an honest evaluation of the situation. I think there's a fear response going on underneath, as far as I can see, that goes something like this. Let's say you are in that situation and you do start to make those changes and it starts to work. What does that say? Especially if you've been, let's say you're someone who's very old and has been unhealthy for a long time. If you start to change your habits, change the way that things are going, what does that say? Well, in some sense, it says that you could have done that earlier. And so if you all of a sudden realize that you've spent a long time in a situation that you didn't like, and you could have done something about it 20 years ago, now instead of feeling like you've been in a situation you don't like for 20 years, you've got 20 years of that plus the regret of not changing it earlier, which is a huge weight. And I think for a lot of people, the resistance to positive change is the resistance to that regret of not affecting positive change earlier. And I'm not sure how to get people through that. I'm not sure how to, like, what the mindset is, other than to just say, like, if it's going to work, might as well start now. But anyway, another interesting fear situation that I think is worth thinking about and maybe looking for in yourself or looking out for in your future self?
I think there's also, in addition to that, the fear going into the future that if you prove to yourself that you can do it, it's now your responsibility if you stop doing it. So, even if somebody is young, it's if you prove to yourself that you can get yourself healthy or that you can pull off something that's difficult, you now have a level that you can get to, that you've just proven to yourself that you can. So if you don't do it, it's really I'm not saying it is their fault, but it is your fault if you don't get to it in your mind. So
Yeah.
I noticed that in myself.
Yeah. Joe, did we get to you? I realize you just raised your hand.
It was a while back. That's okay. I mean, I just want to first thank you for sharing your story. That was helpful to me personally.
Appreciate it.
So thank you very much for that. One other thing is I just want to maybe build on what I had said a little bit earlier, is the idea that the fear of letting someone else down. I look at that as a double-edged sword. I actually don't necessarily always see it as negative. Kind of like where, in the sense that it can also, if it didn't bother me to let people down, that would be a problem. Like, so I look at it as a kind of has the potential to be a healthy relationship with fear. It's just how you engage with it. So I just wanted to extend a little bit on my comments for that, because sometimes I think fear gets this negative connotation, and it sometimes can be a motivating force as well. So I just see it in that particular case, like it could be, again, if I just went and didn't care with the person next to me, letting that person down, I think that would make me kind of a sociopath to a certain degree. I mean, so I mean, it's a little extreme, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of add that in.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes back to the divinity of interest as well. And, just like you said, having a healthy relationship with fear is more important than getting rid of all fear.
Yeah, I feel like my harnessed fear is a significant cause of my successes. Like obsessiveness and planning and needing to get things right is the reason I do well when I do well. Obviously not the sole reason, but I couldn't imagine what my life would look like without the fear.
Cool. Well, Alex, are there any other points that you wanted to make or questions that you wanted to field before we move on to the exercise?
No, not. I mean, yeah, I guess one thing. Do you have a peak anxiety experience that you could describe? And if you could, would you be able to, like, while I explain mine, maybe break down, because I feel like it helped me break down why that specific thing was a peak anxiety experience and or fear experience, and how I can kind of mitigate that in the future. So mine, probably the highest form of anxiety and fear I ever experienced was back in high school with my track meets. And that was by far not nearly the most important things I've done or the most stressful, in a tangible way, or emotionally, the most difficult. But it was the perfect storm for all of my fear triggers, where basically there was the fear of the physical suffering at the end of the race, right? Like I said, with the Go Ruck, I don't have that, but that was more of an extended thing. This was more that last 20 seconds where I need to continue to push, and I'm just in so much, my lungs are just in pain basically from the exertion. There's the pressure on myself to do well, having high expectations for myself, the fear of not succeeding. And then there was also the fear that Joe brought up of letting other people down. So in this example, it was my team, my coaches, especially if I was on a relay or something. And there was just, and also just the actual way that it was structured, where there's, the ready, set, where there's a specific like inciting event that you are looking forward to that specific moment. And I remember I used to tell my mom, don't let me do track again this year. I hate the races. I just think about it all the time. It's like just makes me suffer so much. And that's never something I got past. I just stopped and was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I hate it. And then I was better off. So I tried pushing through it for years, but in the end, it wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to continue. So that was an experience where I feel like pushing through it into the future was a negative, because I switched to something I actually enjoyed, weightlifting, and was significantly happier for it. And I should have maybe listened earlier. So, because it just wasn't worth that. And there was like now that I'm older, I probably could do a desensitization training. But I think what I would have uncovered with that is just like I didn't realize why I was there anyway. So, there was no reflectiveness going on at all. So, but yeah, do you have anything that you would shed any light on stuff?
I mean, just to respond to that, I think that, there's a third path other than brute force your way through it or quit. There's also, exploring, like Julie said, coming at it with a sense of curiosity about that anxiety, and not, it's also like our 5 whys analysis, right? The surface level why might be, well, I have this fear about letting down my coach and my teammates. But why are you afraid of that? Well, because reasons X, Y, Z. Well, why are those important to you? And, going down that path. And that might have actually brought you to that conclusion much earlier, that you didn't know why you were there. And, you didn't have a why that was getting you through the negative experiences of it. I don't know that I have a peak anxiety experience that I can even talk about in that much detail. Yeah, I would have to take some time to think about. I have a lot of sort of mid or high mid tier experiences, but like something that would have been a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks.
Okay, so, all right, how might we change our response? Here's the exercise for this week. I want to give everybody a chance to experience what I experienced in practicing that like CBT style exposure technique. So we're going to set up some sort of fear exposure for ourselves this week. So right now, everybody, if you can, grab something to write with, and we're going to walk through the first couple of steps, and then it'll be up to you to complete this process. And I'll give you the full thing, and you may have to do some thinking and adapt this for yourself. So hopefully you can get something out of this. I think this is probably one of the most powerful techniques psychologically, at least in my arsenal. Has the ability to change your life if you can do it. So first of all, the first thing I want you to write down is, and you can brainstorm this, you can map this out however you want. Write down some things that you feel a fear response to that are sort of proximate to your experience, right? So like Alex, don't write down track meet, because this week you're not going to sign up for track and get to a track meet. It's not going to happen, right? Some ideas might be things like cold calling a contact that you haven't yet for, entrepreneurship purposes, saying hello to the barista, like in my example, investing in a stock you've been watching, trying a new workout that might be too tough for you, but also, might be helpful, standing up for yourself, whether it's at work or in personal life, in some situation where you feel mistreated, those are just some ideas. So take a moment to think about a situation where you may feel that fear response, and maybe come up with a couple of situations, and as you're coming up with them, rate it, like assume that you are going to do that this week, whatever you come up with, and rate your expected level of like that physiological fear sensation on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like, this is the most physically terrified, the most physically uncomfortable I can feel from fear and anxiety, and a 1 being like, you know, whatever the easiest thing in the world is for you, where you feel no anxiety. And the idea is to come up with something that's sort of just on the edge of your comfort zone, maybe like a 3 or a 4. But whatever you come up with, just write it down, rate it. And like I said, try to come up with something that's like a 3 or a 4. Okay, I wrote down 2 for myself that I'll just talk about 1. It was that first example I said, cold calling a contact that I haven't made yet. And for me, I think that's probably like a 5. So the second step is just pick one of these. You can always pick a different one later and go through these steps. But step 2 is to identify the thought patterns of fear. What are the actual things that are going to go on in your mind that are going to contribute to that fear response in that situation? Like I said, in something like social anxiety, maybe looking up the list of cognitive distortions may help you. In fact, let me just pull it up here. And as you come up with that list of cognitive behaviors that are going to lead to that fear response, also maybe come up with some counter strategies, how you're going to handle those things. With something like cognitive distortions, it may be giving counter examples that show you that those particular thought patterns are irrational. It may be physical things like, after I go through this event, I'm going to drink a cup of tea or something that will calm me and lower my heart rate. It may be breathing exercises. It may be whatever the thing is that is sort of a counter response to the things that are going on that contribute to the fear response. And if anybody needs ideas or is lost in this, feel free to just pop it in the chat, and we can, brainstorm ways to fill out this process. And so again, by the end of this session here, you should have at least one thing that you identify as an anxious or fearful situation, a level of expected anxiety were you to face that situation, and some thought processes that you think would contribute to the fear response. And then on the other side of those, some counterexample type thoughts. Oh yeah, cognitive distortions. For anybody who's not familiar, there are, interesting, this is a good list. This is not a good list. Keep thinking while I pull these up. Okay. Catastrophizing, taking an event you're concerned about and blowing it out of proportion to the point of becoming fearful. Arbitrary inference or mind reading, believing that someone doesn't like you without any actual information or something like that. Believing that you can tell what someone is thinking about you, or making any sort of judgment with no support. Personalization is attributing some external event to yourself when there's actually no causal relationship. Like if someone is rude to you, you believe it's your fault, like you must have done something to cause it. Selective abstraction, that's an interesting one. When a person makes a judgment based on some information but disregards the other information. And the example here is someone attends a party and afterward focuses on the one awkward encounter and ignores the hours of smiles. Overgeneralization, dichotomous thinking, either or thinking, attaching negative labels. Those are just some cognitive distortions that are often associated with social situations. Okay, so hopefully you have at least a couple of ideas now. You have a little bit of this and you have enough that you can continue to work on it. There are two other parts of this that you won't be able to do now, but you're going to write them down now anyway. Number one is to actually plan specifically what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and to actually go do it. So, you can get as granular as you want with the planning. Again, back to my example with the barista, I planned exactly what I was going to say, word for word. I gave myself a script. I gave myself a time of day, and I put in as much detail as possible. And then you're going to write out a debrief, which is essentially the same things that you just put in your expectation, but you're going to write out the reality of the situation. So instead of your expected level of fear and anxiety, you're going to rate how the situation actually went. What did you actually feel in the situation and now that it's over? All right, so that's 2. Rate how you felt in the situation and rate how you feel now that it's over. And what were the actual thought patterns that happened, and are they rational and logical? I know that's a big exercise. If anyone has any questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I will assume everyone understood exactly what to do. It's all about exposing ourselves to something just outside of our comfort zone this week and using a systematic approach to analyze what do we expect to happen and what actually happened. Stephen.
Yes. Not only am I having a hard time coming up with a fear, but what about the fact that many of us are still basically in quarantine and not able to get out there with, and put ourselves in such a situation? What are we supposed to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. It's going to require some creativity. And I think especially if your fears revolve around face-to-face social situations, you may just have to pick something different. Or I don't know if anybody has any ideas, throw them out there.
Mine are all my fears around phone calls, so I'm all set.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, like I said, mine, cold calling a contact or cold emailing a contact, any sort of cold interaction, I always check and double check and recheck. And, I've gotten to the point now where after, 5 to 7 checks, I can finally send something and then I check it again later and make sure. And then I'm anxious for an hour, like, oh my gosh, what if I made a mistake and didn't see it?
I'll come up with something. And I think, I don't know if other people are struggling too, but just thinking about it might be helpful.
Yeah, if you do come up with something in the next few minutes while we're here or in the breakout rooms, feel free to say something. Gang.
Yeah, I can initiate like a Zoom meeting with the people you're afraid to see. But anyway, my fear I want to share is it's not really fear. I don't know what is it. It's kind of like I try to. It's a holiday. I think I should give and actually the people who refer give them some gift. But somehow I just feel embarrassed to do that. I don't know why. So I'm not sure. I'm not really feared to do it. I just try to delay not to doing it, not to reach out to them. So when we were talking, I actually sent a couple message to the people I sent. So I actually overcome that to do that. But I'm not sure why. This is not really, I think I don't really have a lot of fear for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But I do have this embarrassment somehow. I don't know why. So there should be nothing to give them gift somehow.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, as everyone continues to churn on this exercise, some questions for the breakout room. Again, what kinds of things cause fear? What are our responses to it? How can we systematically change our responses to it? And all about fear. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up this episode of The Switch. Good luck, everyone, on exposing yourselves to fear this week. I hope that it brings you some satisfaction or whatever you get out of it. So thanks for listening, everyone. Have fun in the breakout rooms, and good night.
Thanks, Jace.
All right, folks. So another great meetup. Thank you, Chase and Alex. So now it's time for breakout rooms. And when we come back, I'm going to ask, as takeaways, I'm simply going to ask everybody, what is their take on fear? How do they think of fear? Okay. And you can have 1 to 2 minutes to talk about whatever your take on fear is. Starting the breakout rooms now.